Hi, this is Corey Johnston, and today's lesson is going to span the range of the 10th through the 31st verse of the 31st and final chapter in the book of Proverbs. And what we're about to read, verse by verse, constitutes an acrostic poem. There are 22 verses, there are 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. Vowels are categorically excluded from the alphabet, but each successive verse begins with the Hebrew alphabet in the successive order they pair. So this would have been this would have made the memorization of it more efficient to its original audience, but there is still value in any language. The word transcends language. The 31st chapter, it identifies the author in the first verse, the words of King Lemuel, a message which his mother taught him. So this wise man was also a king. Solomon was a wise man and a king. It's not an impossible balancing act. It's also necessary that kings combine wisdom with power and might and authority in order that they might rule wisely. And this is pretty much the advice that his mother gives him. And as I conjectured in the preceding lesson, that the respect that his mother, that he had such a respectful mother, instills in him the respect for women, which he gives in the acrostic poem we're going to be covering today, which describes the ideal wife. And the nature that is of his mother's lesson is to not indulge in his lust for women or wine, but rather, these things can only distract. These are temptations for ancient Oriental monarchs. They had harems, they had banquets, they had feasts, but their main duty, theoretically, was not to themselves, but to their people. But the potential for tyranny is the weakness in the monarchical form of government. Nevertheless, it was the only one conceivable in the ancient world, with the exception of Athens and Rome, which lasted as a republic before it was finally subverted to imperial or a monarchical form of government. But rather than to fill his mouth with wine, she advises him in the 8th verse, "Open your mouth for the dumb, and in the cause of all the sons of the departed." So rather than open his mouth to consume wine, she wants him to open up his mouth to speak on behalf and in defense of those who cannot speak for themselves. He has the power and position. These people don't even have the power of speech. They are vulnerable and lack certain advantages to function in human society, but the king exists to protect the weakest and most vulnerable in the society, including the sons of the departed. That just means orphans, departed parents. They're not there anymore. So orphans are especially vulnerable without the parental influence, and Lemuel benefited from a strong maternal influence. Open your mouth, judge righteously, and plead the cause of the poor and needy. So once more, rather than open his mouth to consume wine, she wants him to use that mouth to judge righteously. And wine and women, excessive indulgences at least, can only get in the way of judging righteously. It turns people into selfish creatures rather than other-oriented creatures, which kings by right and design ought to be. And he has the power and privilege and position and the leverage to enact and enforce justice for those who do not have the means or resources to really, get their own justice independently. So that's where the king has to step in. Without them, the rich are just going to walk all over the poor. 10th verse, and this marks the lesson itself. "Who finds a capable wife? For she is worth far more than rubies." So the implicit inference in the question is that a capable wife is a rare creature, and most women are bad people, not because they're women, but because they're human. The same truth exists for men, only much more so. I'm actually going to tell a joke right now. A man and woman arrive at heaven at the same time, and They're accepted by St. Peter. He lets them in, and the man was a litigator who spent his entire life, a lawyer who spent his career protecting women in the workforce and seeing that equal opportunity, equal employment, fair treatment was administered to them. And when the woman is shown to a mansion and the man receives a palace, he protests as what he sees as the inequality in heaven, the inequality that he found on earth that he fought so hard to rectify. He says, why this? And St. Peter says, hey, new guy, you haven't been here that long. We got plenty of women here, but you're our first man. Now that the laughter may or may not have subsided, I'll proceed to comment on the her being worth far more than rubies. Solomon says much the same thing in an earlier Proverbs of wisdom. The value is beyond quantifiable measure of a capable wife. And an inheritance, in another proverb we read, an inheritance is from the father, but a godly wife is from Yahweh. The heart of her husband shall trust her, and she has no lack of gain. So trust is a crucial ingredient and element in any married relationship. A husband has to trust his wife, among other things, to be have faithful fidelity, to raise the children, to protect his interests, to not slander, and just there's so many ways where trust is the essential bond of any married union. If you do not trust your spouse, then your marriage is destined to fall under the unsustainable weight of its own making, and she shall do him good and not evil all the days of her life. So this is a self-evident, obviously a capable and worthy wife will do good and not evil. The potential for wives and husbands to do evil, whether it's cheating or abusing or just neglecting or ignoring her or him, are always there. But all the days of her life, this represents an unending continuum. So much of the love in a lot of marriages, he says eventually that beauty fades and charm is deceptive. But so a lot of people lose the love as their spouses get older and uglier, and but this is a lifelong commitment. Marriage is till death do us part. So all the days of her life is the appropriate wifely and husbandly duty. She shall seek wool and flax, and with delight she works with her hands. So this woman is not exclusively a homemaker, but is actually engaged in commercial pursuits and works with her own hands. She's adept at manual labor, and she will seek the materials necessary to make the clothing for the children. And you can either buy your clothes or make them yourselves. Making them would have been the more economically efficient option. And she not only works, but she genuinely enjoys it. She doesn't complain or murmur, but she works not both because she has to and also because she wants to. She delights with delight. So she not only works, works, but how she works is what's essential in here. She shall be as the ships of Tarshish. She brings in her food from afar. So Tarshish was the western extremity of the known world, the pre-Columbian known world. It was past the Isle of Gibraltar, and so that was the ship. Few ships ventured out into the Atlantic Ocean and lived to tell the tale. It was an uncrossable body of water, which the lengths of which were not known, at least until the Vikings. And the Vikings did in fact beat Columbus to the discovery of the New World, but Columbus's impact was longer lasting and permanent. So he's more historically significant than perhaps Leif Erikson, the Viking who beat him in the discovery to North America. But, she brings food from afar, so she is engaged not only in manual labor but commerce. She is a wise steward of her husband's resources. Now, women, according to the ancient standards, were considered property, but the husband could trust her with his properties or possessions. I don't think women had any legal claim to property or possessions in the ancient world. That's just the way it was. She also rises while it is still night and provides food for her household and a portion for her girl. So her duties, she's up at the crack of dawn, and, it's still dark out. This is 4 a.m, so life begins early in an agricultural setting when the roosters crow, but this one wakes up while it is still dark in order to provide food for her husband and a portion. So any possible thing, portion is an expansive term. It can mean a multitude of things and not necessarily any one provision for her girls, her daughters. But the wifely duties, they were homemakers. This ideal wife is more than a homemaker, but she does not cease being a homemaker. She brings in the food, she cooks it and prepares it and provides for her daughters and her sons as well, implicitly. She shall consider a field and buy it. From her profit she shall plant a vineyard. So this wife is entrusted with her husband's resources. I don't think the potentiality for women to earn wages was alive outside of prostitution, perhaps. But this one, examines fields. So she doesn't just buy it on a whim, but she closely examines and investigates the fruitful potential of the field she's purchasing. She just doesn't buy any old field, and she makes a profit, so she multiplies the investment, and from that she from a field grows a vineyard, so it marches inexorably to greater amassing of property and possession. She shall gird herself with strength and strengthen her arms. So this is not necessarily physically strength, although I don't want to categorically exclude the possibility, but spiritual strength, because physical strength is more or less masculine virtue, but spiritual strength is by gender. It applies to both, but the strength in her arms indicates she is physically strong. She is capable of working with her hands and providing for the family, so she is not a weak, frail creature, but one who is spiritually, morally, and physically strong. She shall taste when her gain is good. Her lamp does not go out by night. So, the Bible says that the worker shall, pay them. The worker is due his wages. Luke 10:7 and a few other places. So, if you make the gain or the profit or accumulate the wealth, you are entitled to enjoy it and taste it. And her lamp does not go out by night. That once more indicates an unending continuum of perpetuity. So even while she rests, she does not really rest. The husband, the motherly duties are a 24/7 thing. And the other thing is that we read earlier of the perpetuity was in verse 12, all the days of her life, and this is so every day, it's all day, every day, and every hour of the day. So all the days of the life is a 365 year a day gig of perpetuity. Her lamp does not go out by night is more or less a 24/7 aspect of perpetuity. She shall stretch out her hands to the distaff, and her hand shall hold the spindle. So she uses her hand. She is engaged in manual labor. She is not a weak, frail, helpless woman, but she's capable of working with her hands to hold the spindle. That is an instrument in making clothes. And remember, and where did we read earlier? She shall gird herself with strength. That gird translates as clothes, but we also read more literally that the portion of the provides food. You know what? I can't find it. We're just going to move on. But I distinctly remember something pertaining to clothes, which connects to the word spindle in the verse we just covered. She shall extend her hand to the poor, and she shall reach out her hands to the needy. So she has not only a mere sentimental concern for the poor and the needy and the impoverished, but she actually the concern motivates and prompts and precipitates action. So she actually extends her hand to the poor. She gives them what they ask for, money or anything else. And she shall reach her hands out. So reach out and extend are more or less synonymous terms, but they are giving and generous. They are physically giving from their generous spirit. And wives may not have had any financial resources to call their own. In rare circumstances they may, but this one was generous with either the element of trust meant that the husband could trust her to distribute some of his resources for the alms of the poor. She is not afraid of snow for her household, for all her household is dressed in scarlet. So the element of fear is symptomatic of sin. It's part of the fallen nature. One of the first thing that Adam and Eve did when they lost the covering of Yahweh was try to flee from it. So fear was a hitherto unprecedented experience and emotion in the human experience in Eden until they sinned. But those who are righteous, the wicked flee when none pursueth, but the righteous are bold as a lion, Proverbs 28:1. So by the opposite end of the same coin, boldness and and courage are symptomatic of righteousness. And she provides for her household. They are dressed in scarlet. Scarlet is expensive material, so it's not enough that they are merely dressed in sackcloth and wool, but dressed in scarlet means that she goes out of her way to provide extra luxuries. And this clothes are necessities, but for a wife to be able to provide luxurious versions of necessities is a mark of an ideal wife. Her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the she shall make tapestry for herself. She is dressed in fine linen in purpose. So she makes she doesn't rely on others to make things for her, but she is capable and able and willing and competent to make the tapestry for herself. She is adept at working with her hands. She's not a helpless, weak, servile creature, but, one who's capable of providing for herself and her family. And she's dressed in fine linen in purple. Fine linen in the book of Revelation is symbolic of the linens are symbolic of the clothing. How we are clothed is how we are characterized. So if we are clothed in the righteousness of the Messiah, that means we are clothed, we possess his righteousness. And purple was the color of royalty. The neighboring nation to the north, Lebanon, was the main exporter of the purple dye. This was the most expensive one, and in some countries only royalty was permitted to wear purple. But this King Lemuel, we don't know where he reigned. This is the only reference in history of him, but her husband is known in the gates when he sits among the elders of the land. So the city gates was the center of commerce and civic discussion, and her husband, a husband who has an ideal wife will reflect positively on him, and no harm can come to his reputation or his standing or his popularity or his influence if he has such a wife as has been previously described and will continue to be described. She shall make fine linen and sell them, and give girdles to the merchant. So once more, the element of manual labor, making the fine linen and selling them. So manual labor is combined with commerce. So this woman is capable of providing for herself, and she's engaged in merchants, so she is commercially active and capable of doing all the stuff. Strength and splendor are her garments, and she rejoices in time to come. So garments that are a synonymous term with clothing. So she is clothed. That means she possesses and exudes and is defined by strength and splendor. These are unbeatable combinations. Strength without splendor or splendor without strength are not quite the same, but the combination of those two qualities are unbeatable, and there's really nothing like it. And she rejoices in the time to come. She is free from worry or anxiety. She does not dread or fear the future. And the Savior's Sermon of the Mount, 6th chapter of the final half of the 6th chapter in Matthew's Gospel, he advises us to worry not. Worry is symptomatic of sinfulness, because anxiety, it's when we're governed by irrational anticipations, and most of the things we worry about never come to pass. So worry is, in most cases, it can be a legitimate emotion, but in most cases it is irrational and unnecessary. Rather, we should rejoice with the future, knowing that we are secure in our standing in not only on earth, but in heaven, more exponentially more significant. She shall open her mouth with wisdom, and on her tongue is the Torah of kindness. So a wise wife is rare, but women are perfectly capable of equaling, and in some cases exceeding, men in intelligence. They did not have the same educational opportunities in the ancient world until rather recently in modern times, yet this capable ideal wife possessed intelligence and wisdom in spite of perhaps a lack of a formal education. Education can certainly supplement and enhance one's natural intelligence, but there is such a one who is intelligent in spite of their lack of education. And a wise wife is a rare commodity, shall we say. Not wise women are equally rare as wise men, again, not because they're women, but because they're people. And on her tongue is the Torah. That is in Agar we read the word law, but Torah is the Mosaic law. So this King Lemuel, he was not on the throne of either Samaria or Israel or Judah in Jerusalem, yet the Torah of Moses, the law of Moses, was on her tongue and on the tip of her tongue and on the front of her mind, and the Torah of kindness. So that means that much of the Torah is designed to instill kindness and charity and generosity in others. She watches over the ways of her household and does not eat the bread of idleness. So to watch over the ways of her household means that she provides and protects and keeps an attentive eye out for the potential dangers, the destructive influences that have a way, especially in modern times, of creeping into the house and destroying the family. She's not idle. Idleness, Proverbs 18:9, he who is idle is a companion or brother of him who is a great destroyer. So when we are idle, there is some truth to the old Puritan maxim that idle hands are the devil's plaything, because when we are idle, now rest is part of our spiritual diet and is a legitimate spiritual practice, but idleness is when we're not, is when we're awake but not busy. So when we are idle, we invite destructive influences in our life, because complete neutrality is not long maintained when one is idle. You're going to gravitate towards the bad when you're not actively engaged in your duties for spiritual discipline and warfare. Her children shall rise up and call her blessed. Her husband in her praises her. So she is beloved, treasured, and esteemed by both her children and her husband. She has the respect and affection and love and loyalty of every member in their household. The children rise up and call her blessed because she is a blessing in their life. And her husband, such a one described, has nothing but praiseworthy characters and qualities, and one who is so praiseworthy deserves to be praised. And how does the husband praise her? And we read of this in verse 29. Many daughters have done nobly, but you have risen over them all. So again, this may not be the best ideal woman in the world, but certainly for him, there's literally nothing like it. The ideal wife has to be the perfect match for you. You have to prefer her above all others. And, there's a lot of elements of complementary compatibility in marriage making. But, he's acknowledging that even though a capable wife is rare, in the 10th verse, they're not unprecedented, they're not unique, but the extent of her nobility is above and beyond all the rest, at least in his eyes. Loveliness is deceptive, and prettiness is vain. A woman who fears Yahweh is to be praised. So loveliness is deceptive. What it does, physical beauty can instill the emotion of lust, which is the adversary's counterfeit version of love. So it has enough characters and properties of the authentic article love, which is of Elohim, to deceive and convince the one who is smitten by its emotion to mistake it for the authentic article. They fall in love at first sight, but love has to be deeper than skin deep. It has to go past the surface of loveliness or prettiness. Prettiness can be in vain. It's not sinful to be beautiful or good looking. It's just, you have to look for more. And that's from such a wife. And I believe that the temptation, especially for women who are born attractive, that is almost a disadvantage in their development of their character because they don't learn to learn or anything else because they can get just by with their looks. But a woman who fears Yahweh is to be praised, same as the man. So the theme of fearing Yahweh is alive and well in verses in Proverbs such as 1:7 and 9:10, where it's identified as the foundation of wisdom, and in some sense it is the foundation, or in the absolute sense it is the foundation of a godly marriage. Your wife has to love, worship, and fear Yahweh at least as much as you do. Give her of the fruit of her hands, and let her works praise her in the gates. So because she works, she contributes, she is entitled to the fruit of her labor, and she earned it, she deserved it. So this is the husbandly duty, to be generous in sharing, even though women were technically considered property and certainly had at least no possessions of their own in the ancient world. He was to share generously with her and let her works praise her in the gates. The gates is where he enjoys a good reputation and influence and esteem on account of being married to such a one. So it is only right that her works be praised by him in the gates, at the center of commerce and business and activity in any city, and politics and justice. This is where it all took place. This is all where it went down. That's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much. I'm so glad you're here. Stay tuned until next time. I'll see you then. Bye-bye.